Hey everyone, welcome back. I am getting ready to use this month's scrapbooking kit to make a lap book. Just real quick, there are 3 packs of Prima flowers. There's this bee and flower round frame, and then we have the new Simple Stories line. We have the pack that has the 12 by 12 sheets and a sticker sheet, a pack of ephemera, and a pack of chipboard frames. So my main focus is going to be getting my lap book base put together and then using the pieces from the scrapbooking kit to decorate it. I have this lemon on black and white stripe fabric. I am going to put some of that fusible featherweight interfacing on the back side of it just to give it a little bit of stability. And there is my book cover trimmed down and cut to size with that interfacing on it. There is the old book cover that I am going to be using for this. And just to kind of get started, I am taking that honeycomb chipboard and I am putting it on the spine of my book here. I have some double-sided tape to hold it in place, and then I'm also going to add just some PVA glue, and I'm going to put it in place, and then after the glue is dried, I will trim off any edges that extend past the spine. Alright, I am using this this Heat and Bond Ultra Hold adhesive sheet, iron-on adhesive, and I don't use it for the adhesive properties. I just put it on the back side of that fabric with that interfacing, just to, it's more like a moisture barrier, give or take. Not really, not a true moisture barrier. It is to keep the glue from seeping up and causing discoloration on the fabric. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to work on one side at a time, and I am going to slowly work my fabric across and try to work it in on the spine and around those honeycomb chipboard pieces, and just kind of see if I can get them to show up. This is a heavier fabric. It is an outdoor fabric. I took out that piece of cardboard from the original spine just so that I could work on the honeycomb from the other side of the book cover. Kind of get them both to go. You can see it easier here where that honeycomb is on the inside and the lighter fabric. Then you can see it on the outside with the pattern. I'm just going to wrap my my book cover all the way around my spine. I'm using my double-sided tape, and that's just to help hold it in place while I wait for, or while I get the paper that I'm going to use to line everything. So I cut 2 sheets of paper, the 2 patterns you see there. I'm using the yellow and black and white pattern paper as a center in between the 2 teal with lemons, and that was just so that I could have it match on the front cover and the back cover, because this is a fairly large book, and the inside papers need to be 8 by 11, so I didn't want to use 2 different papers on the front and the back, so I made more of a stripy patchwork for them. Since I already had my iron out, I'm just getting my inside spine piece put together and ready, just using that gray and white plaid fabric to wrap that piece of chipboard. After I had got all of the major pieces together, I did actually just take it out, and I had some leftover Scotchgard from a couch that we had sprayed, so I did just kind of spray that on the outside and a little bit on the inside just to give it a little bit of protection. My honeycomb was just not really showing up very well. I had hoped that it would show up, the pattern would come through, but it was just, it was not thick enough. If I was to do this again, I would use 2 sets of chipboard and double it up, because with this thick of a fabric, it's an outdoor fabric, so with this thick of a fabric, it just did not want to really show up. So I took my entire spine apart. I cut my spine out, and I decided that no matter what, I was gonna get that spine put together and make it work somehow. So what I did was, at least to try to kind of get part of it to show up, I pulled it apart and I pulled the fabric layers apart, and I added in some of the cut off pieces so that there are some areas that do have the doubled up chipboard. And then I had this package of just some bolts and nuts, and the nuts fit inside those honeycomb pieces, so I actually very carefully placed them in there, and you can kind of see them through here. This is a piece of parchment paper that I used to protect it, because I would be kind of leaving the iron here for a while. I placed those nuts inside the honeycomb because there is that iron-on adhesive underneath, and I just placed my iron on top of those to heat up those nuts on there, to really get that heat in there and press the fabric in and get that glue melted, so that there would be indents for the honeycomb along my spine. And to make sure that everything stayed, I used a real big book, laid it on top, and held those nuts down in place, and just let everything air cool naturally by itself, just to make sure that that iron-on adhesive was all the way cooled down and wouldn't pop apart. And there you have it, the finished product. You can see, with the extra weight, with the extra help of those nuts being pushed in there and adding the weight and letting everything cool naturally, I was finally able to get that honeycomb pattern to show up in my spine. And now with that done, I had to put my spine and my covers back together, so I made sure to line everything up carefully. I used some of that gray and white fabric and some bookbinding tape, and really made sure to make some new strong hinging areas between the spine and the covers. And then, just to clean up the edges of that plaid fabric, I stitched some charcoal seam binding. It was actually rather old seam binding. I don't know if it should. I think it was like 25 cents is the price on that package there. So, and after I put my bookbinding tape on, then I just wrapped that seam binding around just to give everything a straight, clean edge. And then I added more of the iron-on adhesive to that back spine piece, so that from the inside I could quickly add some heat. I didn't want to add too much heat for too long and undo the other side with that honeycomb pattern, but I did just use a little bit of heat so that I could get it on there and get it to stay where I wanted it until the time came to wrap those ends around and get it put together. with my cover finally put together, I am finally able to get to work on all of the folders and files and flips for the inside. I am starting with a hanging folder. It's nice thick material. I have a few that are in this kind of bluish tealish color that goes well with the paper, or with the Simple Stories line. And this first one I am turning into an accordion file, not a big one. I don't really have measurements for it because I do a lot of just eyeballing what I think will look good in the book or the space of the book that I'm putting it in. And the book cover I'm using is a pretty hefty book cover, so I do a lot of eyeballing, just trying to kind of decide exactly how I want the different pieces to look in this lap book. So the first thing I do for this is just kind of try to line it up and cut it down and leave one edge as the fold over for the top flap. There are multiple score lines already on my hanging folder, so I try to work with what's already there. I try to leave the already, you can kind of see the bottom expandable area there. It has score lines, it's already reinforced, so I work from there up, try to leave that already reinforced area as the bottom of my expanding folder, and just get it cut down to size on how I kind of want it to fit on this cover. After I have my outside of my folder cut to the size I want, I grabbed up some heavy cardstock and I am just clipping my layers together right now so that I will have my thumb holes all lined up together for when I do put them on the inside. These little sections, I think they're 3 inches wide and fit the same height as my my expanding folder. I cut them to the same height, and I think they're 3 inches wide. And these are what I'm going to use as the accordion edges. So I just score them every, I think it's every ½ inch. I'm pretty sure I did every ½ inch on these. I added a score line for the accordion folding. Before finally gluing everything together, I just clipped those inserts in place just to make sure that everything was where I wanted it to be. And then I just add some double-sided tape and a little bit of glue and put my little accordion folder together. And then just to add a little bit of contrast, I added a little strip of the pattern paper to the bottom edge of my flap. And then I just added in my holes that I would need for my eyelets, and I stitched across where that pattern paper was, and this is about the time that my sewing machine decided to stop working. I just set my little accordion folder off to the side, and I've grabbed up a few different sized book covers I have and a piece of thick chipboard, and I'm gonna work on my different flaps. I'm just using strips of that file folder because it's a pretty good weight, and adding score lines just to make all of my hinges. To add stability to all of the extra hinges I make, I add some kind of fabric or other. This is the hinging piece for that big flap that is on the right hand side of the lap book. And then just to make sure the edges stay down on this pattern paper, I put some double-sided tape around the edges and then added some glue. And then to line it up and kind of see how much bend I want in that hinging area, I stand it up and get everything in position and make sure my edges are even. And then I come in and glue that flap down. For this gray book cover, I used a scrap piece of that heavy cardstock that I had used in my accordion folder as its hinge, and I do still come in and reinforce it with some fabric as well, since it is a moving part. Because that fabric was so thin, I did fold it over on itself and double it up just to make the glue not be as obvious on that hinge. And I did make sure to add an uneven coating of the glue just so that there wouldn't be any dark spots that really stood out. And then because I really liked the gray of this book cover, because it did go with the rest of the colors in this lap book, I did not recover the front of it, and I just added a piece of the pattern paper to the inside of this cover piece. And then added my other piece to that chipboard flap that I had made. I used a couple of those pattern papers that had the big prints on them, just to make a couple of little folders, really kind of trying to make sure that I kept the folds where at least the majority of those large prints on them would show up. And then just used my 2.5-inch punch and lined up the two different pockets so that they would match with each other where those thumb holes were. And then these are not big accordion folds, but I did add a little bit of an expansion on the sides. And since they were done and I wasn't going to be doing anything else to them, I put them down on the parts of the lap book where I had been planning to put them. I don't know if I would have necessarily done my lap book in this exact order originally, but since my sewing machine had broke at the beginning of the project, I was working on pieces that didn't really need any sewing. Well, I waited for my replacement to get to my house. So I do things that I think might be out of order and might have been out of order for even for me, but I was trying to still get some of this project done during that wait time. Another book cover, it's not the same size as that gray, it's a bit smaller, and I just wrapped it with some sari silk and added a piece of the patterned paper to the inside of it to clean it up. This is actually some pretty thick material. It was a pillow cover that I had found in the clearance aisle, so I grabbed it up because the colors matched the paper and everything else that I was doing, and I'm using that to just make a sturdy hinge, making sure I have it glued down good with some of my Fabri-Tac. And then I just wrap it around the bottom of my accordion folder. I put that accordion folder in the same way I had done the other flap, with just a piece of file folder covered in some fabric. You can see the rest of that pillowcase I have laying back there, because since I had it out, I figured I would cut the pieces I wanted to use for what I was originally thinking of doing for the closure for the book. I had originally planned on making a one-piece closure, but it ended up not working out exactly how I had hoped, and that was when I decided to change it up and turned it into what you have seen in the photos as the final result. Well, I waited to be able to add my stitching to the edges. I just added some Fray No More just to keep all the pieces in place and set that off to the side. I created some little miniature file folders and some coin pockets, coin pouches, little cut files to add to my lapbook, and I'm just going to kind of go through real quick here and show which papers I use to turn in to which little embellishments. These little folders were another thing that I kind of started part way and then I set off to the side until my replacement sewing machine came. I did glue them shut, and I did kind of put them together how they would be going, but I didn't put them in the book because I had already planned on adding stitches or adding stitching along the outer edges to really make sure they stayed closed up and to hold them together. And then I just used my scoreboard just to make sure I had some clean folds where I needed them on the little coin pockets that I had created. And I also have this folder that I had made a cut file for also, and get that folded up and ready to go into the lapbook. Alright, since I was thinking about it, and like I said, this project became just a big jumble of whatever I could manage to do. So on the sticker sheet from the paper pack, I actually peel off the entire back piece of it. That way on some of the stickers I could add either some diamond glaze or some glossy accents and give some of the sticker pieces kind of an epoxied look to them. This little hole reinforcer punch I had ordered, and I had been waiting on it. I didn't really want to cut my hole reinforcers with my silhouette like I normally do. Sometimes it's just easier and faster to have a punch handy. So since it finally arrived, I am just using my 1-inch squeeze punch to make the back pieces of the little parts that I add to my accordion fold envelope to wrap the string around and make its closure. Alright, this is just a little box envelope. The one that I have on the right side of my lap book, if you've seen the finished pictures, it doesn't have any accordion folds on it, just some scoring, some 1/4 inch edges around it, just to kind of make it a little pocket. To kind of get some of my edges to show up a little bit better, I just used some Lawn Fawn sunflower ink and inked the edges of some of my pockets and my little folder pieces just so that they would show up a little better against each other. I wasn't sure exactly how I would end up using this piece of chipboard. I just knew that I really wanted to make it a colorful piece. So I went in and I just used a perfect medium marker. That way I could control where my different areas would be, and I could work on it in sections using different embossing powders as I went along. I have some, I think it's Buttercup from Ranger, watering can from Ranger, a Lindy's Gain in there, I don't remember the name offhand, a couple of baked textures from Seth Apter. I just tried to make sure that there was a little bit of embossing powder on all of the surfaces. It helps strengthen the chipboard some, and it does add some nice color. I used the solid colors, the Lindy's and the watering can and the Buttercup as my bases, and then I came in with ones that were more translucent, like the salvaged patina embossing glaze I used on top of my Lindy's. I used my Rocky Road from Seth Apter to do my black spots on the bees. And then on top of the honeycomb, I added the vintage beeswax from Seth Apter. This is one of those small book covers that I am just using that heavy pillowcase fabric on. Because it's so thick, I don't try to fold it over, I just trim it down even with the edge of the book cover. And then to hold those edges together, I just used my Fray No More and soaked it on up in there just to hold everything in place so that the weaving wouldn't come undone. This is just a number I got at my local hardware store. They have a little bargain bin, basically their clearance section where random items can be found. And I liked these numbers. I picked up a few of them. I think they actually only cost me maybe 50 cents. And I really don't have any rhyme or reason for why I used them in there or in this lap book. I just liked the way they looked on there. And this flap, this book cover flap, isn't really a pocket. I'm just adding one of those larger cut apart cards to it. It's more decorative than anything. You could probably pin or paper clip or use a binder clip to hold things on there if you really wanted to. But I kind of just liked adding bits and pieces in here that weren't necessarily a pocket or to be used for anything, but that just would show all the little sayings that are throughout the paper pack. I have these two pieces of fabric that I have already put the interfacing on the back side of them, and I used some iron-on vinyl on the front of them, and I just printed out the little coin pouch that I had used in my silhouette to make the paper ones, enlarged it a little bit, and then traced it on and cut it out and turned the yellow fabric here into just a coin pouch. I finally figured out exactly what I did want to do for the center, so I am getting my inside spine prepared, and I'm going to punch holes, add eyelets, and run a headband through it, an elastic headband. It's new, never been used, came out of the package that way. Thought I should mention that it's not used. And I'm just going to wrap it all the way around and glue it back down behind it, and then add lots of glue to it and pin it in place while that glue finishes setting up. To make sure that band wouldn't pull apart. In addition to my Fabri-Tac, which I used for most of it, or next to the eyelets and along the headband, I used E6000 to hold that headband down. I hope that made sense. I used E6000 along the center where the headband went along, and then just regular Fabri-Tac along the outside edges of the center spine there. As I went along and got some more parts done, I started adding a little bit of just the decorative pieces here and there, just to kind of keep building up and getting a better idea of where everything was going. I used some more glossy accents on some of the pieces and let them dry to give that enameled look on a little bit of the areas. And even though they did come off the sticker sheet, I added a little bit extra glue to the backs of the pieces I put down, just to make sure that nothing would come off. Now I am back to trying to work out my closure, and I'm just using those clips there just so I remember where to put this back down at, and giving it a good dose of Fabri-Tac to hold it together before I add my little faux holding tacks. They don't actually hold anything, but I do use them just for decorative purposes. They look like they're tacked in and holding, but they're barely long enough to make it into the book cover. And just to make sure that they stayed and didn't pop back out, I added some of my 3D matte gel under the caps of them and a little bit along the stems of them before I hammered them in, and then just let that dry and set up. From here on out, I finally have a working sewing machine again, and I remember that because that's why I was able to put my closure on, because I was able to stitch along the sides. I stitched those 3 folders together. From this point on, I am able to get things going just a little bit better. I turned that gray and white fabric that also has the vinyl on the outside into a couple of pockets. I added just some strips of the yellow and white and some more of that seam binding along the edges, and stitched on a couple of buttons before popping those pockets on the back of that book cover. I have these little magnets. They're not super strong, and I just added a couple onto this little coin pocket just so that it would hold that flap down a little bit. Those are just some little decorative metal pieces from my stash. Well, they're not from my stash. Well, they are from my stash, but I've had them stashed since 2020. They were in a previous Jolie kit. I think I have it nearby. Let me see. Yeah, they were junkyard findings, and oh, they were in 2019. I have the bits left there. They were in the August 2019 scrapbooking kit. This is the little book that I am working on that will be in the center. So I have the pieces of paper on the outside. I have some sari silk that has interfacing on it. I have this gray and white fabric that has interfacing on it. And then I used the Heat and Bond iron-on adhesive to hold all of those layers together, and then added some stitching, some decorative stitching along the edges and along the sari silk. And this is where I did finally decide where to put that chipboard piece that I had used all those embossing powders on, to make it easier to get it to hold in place. Instead of trying to use glue, I just used it on a couple of pieces of scrapbook adhesive sheets. There we go, adhesive sheets, just to hold it in place, because I did have plans to fill in the spaces with some Judykins or some glossy accents, and I knew that that would really help hold it down. I just used my crocodile there. It's not punching holes. It was just to hold it flat so that I could make sure that my glossy accents didn't run out of the spaces I was putting it in. So I just start out with, I fill up the spaces with the glossy accents, and then I just add in drops of alcohol ink on top of it to really give it some color. And I just used like a straight pen to kind of stir it up a little bit. But I used a couple of alcohol inks that were from previous kits. There was the Sunshine Yellow, which was in, I think it's July, I think it says July 2020. I can't read my own handwriting right there. July 2020 mixed media kit, I think. And then I used the salvaged patina, and I don't have that bottle near me right now because my husband needed it for an epoxy project that he was working on. But that was also from a previous kit, the salvaged patina alcohol ink. I used the glossy accents in the honeycomb. It's thicker, and sometimes, I don't know, it's not necessarily like it dries with an aged color, but I've always thought it looked more aged, not quite as crystal clear as the diamond glaze. Might just be me. And then to add, like, my glossy accents are already dry in the honeycomb, and my wings, I would let it dry in sections before moving on to trying to add a different color so I wouldn't have cross-contamination. To deepen the black on the bees, I used that Lindy's powder that is in this month's mixed media kit, and I dropped it on to where I wanted it, added my diamond glaze, and then kind of mixed it up and cleaned up the edges like you see me doing there, just to really darken the bodies of those little bees. This is that other small book cover, and I'm pretty sure that the fabric I used on it is the only fabric the only piece I had left of that print. And it just worked out, and I figured now was as good a time as any to use it up. The colors go well, and it adds a little bit of extra interest just being the only piece in there like that. I popped on another one of my little numbers and the little card on the other side of it, and then I just add it on to the left hand side and add it to that book cover that is on my accordion folder system. Alright, after fiddling around with my my closure, I came to the conclusion that I needed to kind of fix it a little bit. I didn't like the yellow part still being a vertical stripe because it was kind of off center, and it was bugging me being off center. So I cut it. I added the little furniture tacks to the front piece, and then I just made a wider cut of a yellow part of that pillowcase and made it a strap that goes over. I used a curved needle because, you know, I didn't think of all these cool things before I glued down the pillowcase to the front cover. So I used a curved needle to sew on that big button, added a buttonhole, and made it a button closed strap. I wanted to try to fit a couple of the chipboard frames from the kit into my lapbook. So I just used them to make pockets. For this one, I made some homemade glassine. Actually, it was ledger paper. It's a ledger page I made, printed on tracing paper, and then sprayed with a semi-gloss spray to kind of make a fake glassine. Nick the Booksmith did this with tracing paper and semi-gloss spray. I personally I love this technique. I think it's less messy than the usual wax method, and I think that adding the spray actually helps really strengthen that thinner tracing paper. So I just glued that to the back of this, and I didn't want it all the way flat against the surface. So I have some thick macrame cord, and I ran it along the edges to kind of give that pocket, that chipboard piece, a little bit of lift off of the side of the book cover that I'm putting it on. I added just another little pocket above that coin pocket, just made out of a scrap of that sari silk that already had interfacing on it, and then I just stitched the edges and glued it down and turned it into a little pocket. And I really kind of wanted to really make sure that this chipboard piece, this chipboard frame, stood out more. So I grabbed up the lemon Dina Wakley glossy spray that was in April's mixed media kit this year. I'm pretty sure it was April. And I just painted it on kind of thin, so you can still see the pattern of the paper behind it, but adding that extra bit of yellow on the inside really kind of makes that chipboard piece pop. So after all of that was dry on the front cover, I started putting the inside together, and I just used some manila folders, cut them down to size. I used my envelope punch board to add the little tabs that stick up along the top of the folders. I really kind of eyeballed. I would put it on one edge kind of centered so it would clip off to the edge. I eyeballed about where I would want the other side to go, and then I would trim off the remaining area that I didn't want sticking up anymore. I hope that made sense. I added some more. This is some more of my homemade glassine that I had printed, like measurement conversions and measurement charts on, and I just sewed them together, glued one of the blank pages down in there, and it's just an extra little center to my center book. I liked the idea because obviously I don't think you could fit necessarily every recipe ever in this little book. So my idea was always kind of making it like family favorites. So I added this this chipboard frame it's also a pocket. I added some old pictures to kind of go with the family favorites or recipes that have been in the family for generations. I backed it with I think I backed it with a piece of manila folder just to give it a smooth surface so that things going in and out wouldn't get caught on the edges of the pictures. Added the same cording to it to kind of hold it up a little bit and turned it into a pocket. Now I'm trying to work out how to keep some of the flaps together until they're ready to be opened. So I just went through my magnet collection, decided to add extra work for myself and started popping magnets in. And then if they were where they were able to be seen, then I would just grab up one of the bits of ephemera or one of the stickers from the sticker sheet to cover them up. For this one right here, I actually made kind of a magnet cluster. It's actually kind of thick. And it actually flips underneath the surface of that book cover to connect with the magnet that is on the inside edge of that that accordion folder. And that was so the magnet wouldn't get in the way of the opening of the pocket, and also it allows for a little bit of space for that frame that I do have lifted up on that macrame cord. It took me a bit, I'm not gonna lie. I really kind of struggled with this magnet closure, trying to figure out exactly what to do before I came up with adding a lot of layers, there's actually a lot of magnets in here. I have some magnetic tape, and it's not super strong, but I have some magnetic tape, and I honestly have zero idea of where it came from, but it did work really well. I kind of wanted to make a belly band on this just so cards could slide in and out, but I also wanted to make it easier to slide them in and out because I have that little metal label thing over there which was covering the magnets for the small book cover flap, and then the edge of the fabric is a little thick. The edge of the smaller book cover was kind of thick, so I actually used that magnetic tape and made a hinge on one end of this belly band, and the other end I used a couple of, I think they were basic gray magnets. They're a bit stronger than my other ones, so that it had a magnetic closure so that belly band could be lifted and your cards or whatever you put under there, it would be easier to get them in and out. So I do have a full length of that magnetic tape on the belly band and a coordinating piece on the book cover, and then extra magnets that are stronger up on the top of it to make sure that it would stay closed. This is me finally figuring out how to make that large closure for that whole side, for that big one. After I did the belly band, it did finally dawn on me to kind of make a little magnetic tab for that larger book cover that could flip in and out of the way if you wanted to use the pocket. These are some index tabs that I printed out, and I also sprayed them with some semi-gloss spray. They're not translucent like the homemade glassine is, but they are on a rather thin paper. On this little box pocket, I guess I'll call it just my box pocket, I added some removable dividers in it. I think that's my beverages and cocktails pocket. So I added removable dividers into it. This is another clean, unused headband that I decided to add another removable little file folder out of. I used the removable parts for my bigger areas. Like the big one in the center has your main dishes and side dishes for your dinners or your suppers. And this little one over here that I add in has my desserts and appetizers and a pocket just labeled other. I did reinforce my hinge with some more sari silk, added my Yoo-hoo glue stick everywhere, and I just used some scrap pieces of paper to add my cover. I have another little chart. I think those were oven conversion times on the front of this one. I just made a little pocket for the back of it, cut a little thumb hole out of it, and folded up another little vellum, or not vellum, but homemade glassine piece that has just little tidbits of helpful tips on it. These are recipe cards that I created and printed out. They actually have printing or extra lines printed on the back of them. Some of them are 4x6, some of them are 3.5x5, and I printed on pieces of manila folder that I had cut to size. And then I just used some unlined 3x5 index cards for some more of my little recipe cards. And then finally on this side, I am adding my magnetic strap to help or to hold the inside flaps, all those book covers, in place on this side. And I just used one strap to wrap all the way around and added magnets to it, and added magnets to this center area that didn't have anything printed on it, and then covered it up and, you know, made it decorative over those magnets, and added another piece of the ephemera to the end of my strap that I had made for that closure. So now, with all of my main pieces put together, I am just going through and finishing up adding some of the ephemera and some of the stickers for some decoration. I added some more magnetic tape and some of my smaller, weaker magnets to the back of this box folder just to help hold it down, and then just used pieces of ephemera to cover up the magnets. I have these little plaquettes from Tim Holtz. I do have one on the left hand side of the book. They're just decorative. They're not even magnetic. The brads for them are magnetic, but the actual plaquettes aren't. This particular little coin envelope actually doesn't have a magnetic closure because it is underneath that box folder, but that little plaquette does give it a little bit of weight just to hold the flap down. And then just to kind of fill in some of the emptier areas, I picked pieces of the ephemera or parts of the cut apart sheet that had white space on them that could be written on, just to fill in some of those areas. And even though I do have my magnetic tape on this folder and pocket, it didn't really want to close tight, so I just added on the corner there where you see the clips, and underneath that little lemon sticker is a couple of basic gray small magnetic discs, just to really give it a little extra hold. Finally, after a lot of setbacks and this taking a lot longer than I originally had planned for it to take, I finished my little recipe lapbook. I have a lot of little flaps, a lot of little tuck-in spots and pockets to hold recipe cards. I have labels for, I guess, for the major food groups. I have your main dishes and your various meats. I have a pocket for vegetarian main dishes, side dishes, freezing and canning, drinks, beverages, cocktails, breakfast, lunch, such, or, you know, not every category ever, but like the main ones. And this isn't really made for holding your entire recipe collection, but more for holding family favorites or tips and tricks and whatnot that you may have collected or that had been handed down through the generations. I hope you enjoyed this lap book. It's not exactly a full step-by-step tutorial, so I hope I kind of explained enough what I was doing, and it gave you some ideas of what you could do with the scrapbooking kit this month. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you will always know when new videos come out. Feel free to share this video. Thank you, and I will see you again next week.